Have you ever imagined what the world was like before the Great Flood? How Noah lived? The man who changed the course of history. Today, we're going to dive into that incredible journey filled with challenges, faith, and mysteries. But before we start, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching us from? Drop a comment below and share a message of faith. Who knows? Your story might inspire others.
Yeah, and don't forget to leave your name too, right? You might end up becoming part of this conversation. We're talking about an ancient story, but it still has a lot to teach us. And, between you and me, some parts are so surprising they feel like a movie script.
Exactly. So go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on upcoming content. Oh, and leave a question you'd like to see answered here about Noah or the flood.
That's right. Let's build this conversation together. And trust me, what's coming next is going to make you question a lot of things, including how God chose Noah and what he went through. Ready? Then let's go.
To understand Noah, we need to take a look at the world he lived in. The Bible describes that time as an era of corruption and violence. In Genesis 6:5, we read that the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. The human heart was consumed by evil thoughts, and society had completely turned away from God.
It's interesting how that sounds familiar, right? It feels like history keeps repeating itself from time to time. But hey, what exactly does wickedness mean in this context? Was it just physical violence, or was there more to it?
Good question. Wickedness here goes beyond violence. It includes injustice, greed, idolatry, and disrespect for moral and spiritual laws. Noah's world was defined by a total disregard for God and the principles he had established.
So basically, chaos had taken over. But what about Noah? Was he really different, or did he just get lucky and end up being chosen?
Noah really was different. The Bible describes him as righteous and blameless among the people of his time. Genesis 6:9. He walked with God. In a world consumed by chaos, Noah kept his faith and obedience. That's what caught God's attention. Wow, can you imagine being the only righteous person in a totally corrupted world? That must have been lonely, no doubt. And that's where the most incredible part of this story begins. How God saw potential in Noah and trusted him with the mission of saving humanity. Picture this. You're living your life in a chaotic world, and suddenly God speaks to you. That's exactly what happened with Noah. In Genesis 6:13, God says, "I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth."
Hold on a second. So God spoke directly to Noah, like he heard a voice or had a vision. How did that work back then?
In the Bible, God communicates in different ways, through dreams, visions, or even directly, as with Moses. For Noah, the Bible doesn't give us many details on how he heard this message, but he clearly understood what God wanted from him.
Okay, but think about it. That's a huge responsibility, to know that the future of the world is in your hands. I can only imagine what must have gone through his head.
Definitely a mix of emotions. But Noah's response was obedience. God gave him clear instructions: build an ark. And not just any boat. This was a huge project designed to save not only his family, but also pairs of every animal species. Now let's talk about the ark. God provided specific details: 300 cubits long, 50 wide, and 30 high with 3 decks. That's roughly 135 meters long, 22.5 wide, and 13.5 high. Truly massive for that time.
Wow, that's bigger than many modern ships. But wait, how did Noah manage to build something like that? Did he have advanced tools, or was it all done by hand?
Good point. The technology back then was pretty basic. Simple tools, a lot of manual labor, and of course time. It's believed the construction took decades, plus Noah probably faced a ton of opposition and mockery. People had no clue what he was doing.
That makes sense. Who would understand building a huge boat on solid ground with no sign of rain? It sounds crazy.
Exactly. And here's where we truly see Noah's faith in action. He trusted God even when everything seemed impossible. Noah's calling wasn't just about building an ark. It was an act of obedience and faith. He believed in God's promise and the warning about the flood, even though he had never witnessed anything like it before.
That makes me wonder, how many times are we called to do something we don't fully understand? And do we have Noah's courage to move forward when everything seems to be against us?
Good point. Noah's story teaches us that trusting God is an act of faith and bravery. It also reminds us that even in the midst of chaos, we can make a difference by choosing to walk in obedience to God.
That's so true. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to come. The challenges, God's messages, the flood itself, and how it all shaped human history.
With God's plan in hand, Noah began building the ark. He knew the task would be long and challenging, but maybe he had no idea how much it would put him at odds with the world around him. Just imagine, while everyone else went on with their lives, ignoring God's warnings, Noah was chopping wood, shaping planks, and putting together something no one understood.
Have you ever thought about how much work that took? I mean, Noah wasn't exactly a naval engineer, right? He was just an ordinary guy with a divine mission. He must have faced so many difficulties, starting with the tools. We're talking thousands of years ago. No power saws, no modern nails. How in the world did he manage?
Great question. Back then, the tools were basic, made from wood, stone, or crude iron. Everything depended on manual labor. He probably relied on help from his sons, using techniques we'd consider primitive today, but that worked for their time. Plus, he needed to gather materials in huge quantities. The Bible mentions gopher wood, which he had to cut, transport, and shape. It was a tough, time-consuming job.
And that's not even mentioning the animals. Have you thought about how he planned out space for thousands of species, each with its own specific needs? Just thinking about that logistics puzzle gives me a headache.
Exactly. The ark was designed with 3 decks with separate compartments for different kinds of animals. But more than that, Noah had to deal with people's disbelief all around him. And that's where one of the toughest parts of his mission begins. The Bible doesn't give us many details about how people reacted while Noah was building the ark, but we can imagine. In a world ruled by evil and corruption, the idea of a man announcing a massive flood and building a gigantic boat on dry land must have seemed ridiculous.
I can almost hear the jokes. Hey Noah, where's the water? Or, have you lost your mind? Is that an ark or a giant barn? You can just picture how much they must have mocked him.
Exactly. And it reminds us that many times following a divine calling means dealing with misunderstanding and even hostility. Noah probably faced constant ridicule, maybe even sabotage. Imagine living surrounded by people who not only refuse to believe you, but actively try to discourage you.
That's harsh. He wasn't just wrestling with the physical challenges of the work, but the psychological pressure too. And let's be honest, that requires a huge amount of inner strength. How do you think he handled it?
Noah trusted God completely. His faith was his fortress. He knew that even if the whole world was against him, God was on his side. That's something we can all learn from him, the importance of staying firm in our faith, no matter the odds. Noah wasn't alone in this journey. He had the support of his family, his wife and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, along with their wives. The Bible doesn't say a lot about them, but we know they were crucial for finishing the ark.
Have you ever thought about how much they had to believe in him? It couldn't have been easy. They were betting their lives on something that looked like complete madness to everyone else.
True, their faith in Noah and in God was vital. Just imagine the sacrifices, giving up their routines, dealing with the same ridicule, working day in and day out on something no one was sure how it would turn out. They trusted in God's promise and came together to see it through.
That really shows how one person's faith can inspire those around them. Noah's trust in God was like a beacon for his family. It's an important lesson. When we hold on to our faith, we can strengthen the people we love.
As Noah built the ark, God kept sending messages. He didn't just give the initial instructions, but guided Noah along the way. It shows that God doesn't abandon us once he gives us a mission. He walks with us through it.
That's interesting. So God was present the whole time. How do you think Noah knew what to do when problems popped up?
God communicated with him, offering guidance and reassurance. The Bible doesn't spell out each interaction, but we can imagine Noah praying, listening for God's voice, and following his instructions. That closeness to God gave Noah the strength to keep going, even in the hardest moments.
And that makes me wonder, how often do we ignore God's messages? Maybe God's trying to speak to us, but we're too busy to listen.
Exactly. Noah teaches us how important it is to stay alert and open to God's voice. His total obedience is a powerful example of faith in action. Building the ark wasn't just an act of faith, it was also a turning point in human history. It symbolizes God's judgment on evil, but also His grace and mercy for those who remain faithful.
That makes me think. Did Noah have any idea what impact he'd have on the future? I mean, he didn't know his story would be told for generations and serve as an example to billions of people.
Probably not. He was just obeying God without seeking glory or recognition. That makes his story even more inspiring. Noah wasn't driven by ego or ambition. He acted out of love and obedience to God.
That's true, and it raises a question. Are we living our lives with the same dedication and purpose, or are we letting the world's pressures knock us off track? A powerful thought. And that's why Noah's story remains so relevant today. It shows that even in the midst of chaos, it's possible to live with faith, purpose, and courage.
After years of hard work, the ark was finally ready. Noah had followed every single detail of God's instructions. He knew the time of judgment was drawing near. Then God gave the final warning, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because you are the only righteous person I have found in this generation." Genesis 7:1.
Just think about how heavy that statement must have felt. God basically told Noah, "You're the only one I consider righteous." That must have been both a relief and really sad at the same time, don't you think?
No doubt. Noah knew he was going to be saved, but he also knew destruction was coming for everyone else. And before entering the ark, God gave him one more instruction: to bring pairs of animals, male and female, to preserve life after the flood. That command shows that even in the midst of judgment, God still cares about His creation.
Okay, but think with me. How did Noah manage to gather all those animals? Was it a miracle, or did he have to round them up one by one?
The Bible suggests that God brought the animals to Noah. In Genesis 7:9 it says, "They went in 2 by 2 into the ark." It's a testimony to God's power, who orchestrates even the most complicated details. Noah just had to trust and do his part.
That makes me think. How many times do we worry about things God is already working out for us? Sometimes all we really need to do is trust and handle our own responsibilities.
Finally, the day arrived. Noah, his family, and all the animals went into the ark. Then something incredible happened. God shut the door of the ark Himself. That moment symbolizes that the window of mercy had closed and judgment was beginning.
Hold on. God shut the door. That sounds so symbolic, like He was saying, "Now it's my turn to act."
Exactly. And right after that, the rain started. But it wasn't just a light drizzle or a quick shower. It was a storm unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. In Genesis 7:11-12, it says, "All the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. The earth and the sky poured down water non-stop."
Wow, that must have been terrifying. Just imagine the noise of the rain and wind, people trying to find shelter. It gives me chills just thinking about it.
And it wasn't just the rain. The Bible also mentions the springs of the deep. Water was coming up from underground too. It was total chaos, and there was nowhere to hide. Everything happened exactly as God had warned. While the outside world was being destroyed, Noah and his family were safe inside the ark. But that doesn't mean it was easy. They were cooped up with thousands of animals, dealing with noise, smells, darkness.
Let's be honest. Living with that many animals in a confined space must have been a huge challenge. Can you imagine the logistics? Feeding them, cleaning up after them, keeping peace between species. It must have required massive teamwork.
No doubt. And then there's the emotional side. Being isolated, not knowing how long it would all last, that must have been really tough. But Noah and his family held on to their faith. They knew they were under God's protection.
This makes me think about how we deal with tough situations. Sometimes we complain about the smallest things, but Noah's example shows that faith can help us through even the hardest challenges.
After 40 days and 40 nights of continuous rain, The waters still covered the earth for 150 more days. During all that time, God never forgot about Noah. In Genesis 8:1 we read, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark."
That line has always caught my eye. God remembered Noah. Does that mean God can actually forget someone?
Not in the way we humans forget. When the Bible says God remembered someone, it means he acted on their behalf. It's a way of showing that he never abandons those who trust in him, and that's exactly what he did for Noah.
Got it. So even when it looked like nothing was happening, God was taking care of everything. That's a big reminder for us, right?
Absolutely. We often feel forgotten or left alone with our problems, but Noah's story shows us that God never stops working in our lives, even when we can't see it immediately. After those 150 days, God started making the waters go down. He sent a wind over the earth, and the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed. Gradually, the land started to emerge again. In Genesis 8:4, it says that the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat.
Wait, Ararat. Where is that? Is it a real place or just symbolic?
Great question. Mount Ararat is located in what we now call Turkey. Many archaeologists and explorers believe the ark might be there, though there's still no conclusive proof. Either way, Ararat symbolizes a new start for humanity.
That's amazing. But just imagine the relief Noah and his family must have felt realizing the flood was finally ending. It must have felt like a whole new breath of hope.
Exactly. The ark wasn't just a means of survival, it was a symbol of God's faithfulness. He promised to save Noah, and he kept his word. And as the ground began to dry, it became clear that the worst was behind them. After months of being cooped up, the day finally arrived for Noah and his family to step out of the ark. Just imagine the relief and excitement of feeling solid ground under their feet again. In Genesis 8:15-16, God commanded, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives." It was the start of a brand new chapter for humanity.
I can't help but wonder, what was it like to leave the ark after all that time? It must have been a mix of joy and uncertainty. The world they once knew no longer existed.
Exactly. They were stepping into a completely transformed world. Everything else was gone. No cities, no towns, no other people, just empty land and a silent sky. It was like starting all over. And the very first thing Noah did after stepping onto dry land was build an altar to thank God. In Genesis 8:20 we read, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it."
That's interesting. Before he even thought about rebuilding his life, Noah decided to give thanks. It's a reminder that even in our toughest times, we should acknowledge God's goodness.
Absolutely. That act of gratitude showed that despite everything, Noah recognized his survival and the chance to begin again were gifts from God. After Noah's sacrifice, God made a promise. In Genesis 9:11, he declared, "I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." And as a sign of this covenant, God created the rainbow.
Hang on. So the rainbow as we know it today started right then and there. That's fascinating. It's like God was saying, every time you see this in the sky, remember my promise.
Exactly. The rainbow is more than just a natural phenomenon. It's a visible reminder of God's faithfulness. He showed that even after judgment, His mercy remains. And this covenant wasn't just for Noah, it was for all of creation.
That's so beautiful. It's like God was reaffirming, I care about you. I want a future for you. But I wonder, did Noah and his family understand the full depth of that promise back then?
Maybe not completely, but they trusted Him. Their faith was rooted in obedience and in their relationship with God, even if they didn't grasp everything right away. And that's something we can learn too. Trust God, even when we don't have all the answers. Out of the ark, Noah and his family faced the immense challenge of rebuilding their lives. They had to plant, harvest, raise animals, and basically repopulate the earth. It was a massive undertaking, full of hardships.
Yeah. And without any outside help. There were no neighbors to share resources with or bounce ideas off. They were totally on their own. That must have been just as hard as surviving the flood.
No doubt, but Noah kept trusting God. He knew that despite all the challenges, they weren't alone. God had made a covenant with them and was guiding them every step of the way. And as time passed, the earth began to flourish again.
But I wonder, were they afraid? I mean, what if another catastrophe happened? How did they deal with that sense of uncertainty?
Great question. They probably did feel fear and doubt sometimes, but the rainbow in the sky was a constant reminder of God's promise. He had guaranteed never again to destroy the earth with a flood, and that assurance gave them courage to keep moving forward. Even so, Noah's story also shows us how human we are. After the flood, he planted a vineyard, made wine, and ended up getting drunk. In Genesis 9:21, it says, Noah drank some of its wine, got drunk, and lay uncovered inside his tent.
That's so relatable, right? Even someone as faithful and upright as Noah had flaws. It's a reminder that no one is perfect.
Exactly. And this episode teaches us that even when we mess up, God continues to love us and gives us the chance to start over. Noah's story doesn't end with his mistakes. It ends with the legacy of his faith.
And that's what gives us hope. It doesn't matter how many times we slip up. We can always turn back to God and trust in His mercy.
Noah lived for another 350 years after the flood and passed away at the age of 59. He watched the world be rebuilt and saw his family grow, becoming the foundation of a new era for humanity. His story is a testament to obedience, faith, and perseverance.
I find it amazing how Noah's life still rings true for us today. It reminds us that even when chaos reigns, God always has a plan. And if we trust Him, we can make it through anything.
Exactly. Noah's legacy goes way beyond just the ark. He shows us that faith is the key to facing life's challenges and that even in the fiercest storms, God is right there with us.
And I think that's the message we need to take with us. Trusting God, even if we don't understand it all. That's what Noah did, and his story continues to inspire us to this day.
The story of Noah is more than just a historical event or a biblical account. It's a reflection of the human condition and our relationship with God. From that very first call, through building the ark, enduring the flood, and then starting anew, Noah showed unwavering faith.
Have you ever stopped to think about what Noah's story really represents? It's not just about surviving a flood. It's about trust, obedience, and being able to hear God's voice, even in the midst of chaos.
Exactly. Noah's faith is a living example that God never abandons us. He guides us, strengthens us, and fulfills His promises, even in our hardest moments.
And this story still speaks to us today, doesn't it? We all face our own floods. It might be a challenge at work, an issue within our family, or even doubts about the future. That's when faith makes all the difference.
Let's reflect on this. Because of one man's faith, humanity had the chance to start over. Noah saved not only his family, but also future generations. He became the link between creation's past and future.
That's so powerful. The idea that a single person, by listening to God and obeying, can change the course of the whole world. Have you ever thought about what our faith could do? Maybe not on a global scale, but for the people right around us?
True. And Noah's story reminds us that every act of obedience to God has an impact. Even if we don't see it right away, our actions can transform lives.
I think this challenges us to live with greater purpose, don't you agree? To seek God's voice and take action, even if it's hard or seems crazy to others.
Noah's story teaches a few fundamental lessons. First, the importance of trusting God even when we don't understand everything. Second, the need to persevere through adversity. And third, the strength that comes from a deep relationship with God.
And you know what I find incredible? Noah wasn't perfect. He was human with faults and weaknesses, but that didn't stop God from using him. That gives us hope because it shows that God can use any of us, despite our imperfections.
Exactly. Noah wasn't chosen because he was special, but because he had a willing heart. He trusted, obeyed, and followed God, even when it seemed impossible.
That's something we can all do. Take that step of faith, even if we don't know how everything will end. And that's when God shows up.
Another key point in Noah's story is the faithfulness of God. He promised to save Noah and his family, and he kept his word. He promised never again to destroy the earth with a flood, and the rainbow still stands as proof of that promise today.
I love how God remains faithful, even when humanity fails. He never gives up on us. He keeps offering us new chances to start over, just like he did with Noah.
And that faithfulness hasn't changed. God is still with us, guiding, protecting, and fulfilling his promises. Noah's story is a reminder that we can put our total trust in God.
And that trust helps us face anything, no matter how big the storm. Because we know that, just as God was with Noah, he's also with us.
Noah's life is a story of faith, perseverance, and trust in God. It encourages us to face our own challenges with courage and to live according to God's purposes.
And the question is, what are you going to do with this story? How can Noah's faith make a difference in your life right now? Maybe it's time to pay more attention to your relationship with God and listen for his voice in the middle of your struggles.
Before we end, we want to invite you to subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about other incredible biblical characters and the lessons they teach us. This way, you won't miss any new content.
Also, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to know where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. Your participation really makes a difference.
Share this video with someone you think needs to hear this message. After all, faith has the power to transform lives, and we never know who might be in need of a word of hope.
And of course, feel free to explore our other videos. There's plenty more good stuff waiting for you. See you next time, and remember, trust God. Even when life's storms come, he is faithful.